What's up, BSers? We are back today with another movie review, and today we are talking about Kingsman 2: The Golden Circle. And now this movie we were super anticipating because we loved the first one.
We didn't get a chance to do a full review of the first movie leading up to the second one, but we did really enjoy this first one with a few minor critiques here and there, but overall we really liked the movie. So this movie starts off, I believe it's about a year or so after the first one ends, and we're following Eggsy and his current life and, what he's been up to since the end of the first one, and he gets dragged into this plot going on that involves the American version of Kingsman, which are the Statesmen, and they essentially are teaming up to fight against this evil person played by Julianne Moore and whatever diabolical scheme she has.
Now, like we said, we had a lot of high hopes for this movie, and before we get into our actual general impressions, we need to have a couple drinks because unfortunately this one's a little rough.
I have opinions. If you're one of those people who don't like other people with strong opinions, you can just click away now because you're going to hate us after this. Particularly me.
I think, like we said, because we hoped so much for it, we ended up just having a lot of strong feelings about the direction that this movie took the franchise, especially because the first one was so good. And frankly, we were just really disappointed.
As the title says, this is a spoiler-free review. However, we are going to be discussing a few spoilers at the very end of this video, which we will, very much announce. But if you're interested in that, stay tuned. So let's kick off talking about the new characters in this one that were introduced in addition to the first one. So we have a lot of very big blockbuster names in this movie, a lot of Oscar winners, which surprised me. So we've got Julianne Moore, we've got Jeff Bridges, Channing Tatum. I don't think Channing Tatum's an Oscar winner, but he's still a big name. We just had a lot of people. There's a surprise celebrity cameo, which if you've been around film Twitter the past couple days, you've probably already seen it, but...
And as always, Colin Firth, Mark Strong, yes. It's a pretty star-studded cast.
Yeah, and as you know from the trailers, this is not spoilery because it's very much in the trailers, Colin Firth is back. He didn't actually die in the first one. We'll get into that maybe a little bit. For how much this was star-studded, I was actually kind of disappointed with, they tried really hard. The performances are good. I feel like the writing was a little bit lacking for them, and they tried to balance too many characters and didn't quite hit the mark with it.
Yeah, it seemed like they pulled all these people in, and all these people really showed up to give a really great show. But there was quite a few scenes where I think the writing caused the actors to struggle, because you could tell there was a couple really, garbage lines in this that you could tell they're really trying to bring some, emotion to and stuff, and they came across so flat just because it was really dumb.
And I, for one, was very excited for Channing Tatum in this, not just because, he's the stereotypical hot guy, but I've actually really enjoyed his acting of late, especially, with Logan Lucky, if you saw our review with that. I think he was really good in that, and he's been doing some more serious projects that aren't like Magic Mike. And so I was really excited to see what he did in this movie, and it's very misleading for how much he's in this movie. He is very little in this movie. It's not much at all. I will say, Taron Egerton, is that how you say his name? The guy who plays Eggsy, he was really good in this, as usual. When we first saw him in the first Kingsman movie, he was relatively unknown. It was the first time I had ever seen him.
He's super unknown.
Yeah, and I think he just does really good performance. He has great chemistry on screen. I loved the performances in this. Like I said, it was just the writing behind them that kind of fell short. Julianne Moore, her character is the villain, and I actually really liked her portrayal of the villain. She's probably my top, 2 favorite characters from this movie.
Yeah, she gave a really strong performance as the villain, and I felt like we both left being kind of was rooting for her over the rest of them.
Yeah, this movie does get pretty political, which I was surprised by with the villain storyline, which we won't get too much into it because that is pretty spoilery, but it does take a political stance with it, which I felt like was trying to have a commentary, but ultimately was still hokey.
So we've mentioned the writing a couple times, and I think the plot, especially how it's written, is where they really struggle in this film. there are so many things going on.
There's so much in this movie. I had seen a few people tweet out before we went to see this. We generally avoid other people's reviews before we see movies, not to get tainted by them, but I had seen a couple people mention that it was a very busy film, and I think that's a really accurate description of it.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, they tried to do so much with the plot and have so many different subplots for so many characters that it almost felt like they didn't do the main storyline enough justice. A lot of the big emotional parts that should have hit hard fell kind of flat because they were moving on to another subplot so quickly, and that was kind of disappointing. It felt like they went a weird direction.
Which, speaking of the emotion ties to this movie, they did try really hard for you to feel emotionally for characters or certain deaths or certain like dramatic scenes in the movie. And I had a lot of trouble connecting to those, particularly because there is one song throughout the entire movie that is a thread. It's in it like 5 or 6 times, either instrumentally or full-blown like lyrics. And it's the West Virginia song, which if you have seen Logan Lucky, that is the like crux of the film emotional song in it. So I was like, Channing Tatum, Logan Lucky, Channing Tatum, Kingsman 2, same song. I don't know, I was kind of over it.
It was very hard to connect with a film that felt like was using the same exact ploy that Logan Lucky used, and it's kind of odd to have 2 big films come out with big casts that utilize the same exact country song.
Especially a song that, like, I know that's a pretty popular song. However, it's not something you hear on the radio every day. So it's not, like, the most popular song. So it was weird.
Yeah, that was surprising, but overall, they just got so muddled down in different subplots. It felt like they struggled to really deliver on their core plot. And at times, it almost seems like they would put the core plot on hold in order to have one of these subplot moments for a character that you don't care enough about yet. And it messed up the pacing for me.
I agree. So we talked about the characters and the plot. Let's talk about the cinematography and the action scenes, because I feel like both of those things are very big cornerstones for this movie franchise. The first movie obviously had some stellar action scenes. The church scene is one of my favorite all-time action scenes ever. Yeah. And this one definitely tried to outdo the first one and did not succeed.
Yeah, I felt like it was their set pieces that were their problem as they tried to figure out how could we top this scene. And I think that first action scene in the film actually starts really off very strong. And I was impressed with how they shot it and how it looked. It was pretty
fun to watch, too.
But what happens is later on in the film, it gets very muddled. They start doing quicker cuts. They do a lot. Yeah. They do a lot of trying to make things seem fast-paced, but it ends up feeling very jittery. And like, you know, if you've seen any of our other action movie reviews, we really prefer to actually see good choreography, good, wide shots showing the action. And this movie felt very zoomed in, and
which I will say, I feel like that's a little bit reminiscent of some comic scenes. Correct me if I'm wrong, because as we've stated before, Steven is much more into comics than I am currently. But I feel like comic book action scenes sometimes, or a lot of times, you see like the more zoomed in action shots. And because this film and its franchise is based off comics, I'm wondering if that was what they were going for. But for some reason, it just didn't translate very well on screen, at least for me personally. Other people might have really loved it, but it felt very jarring and very, like, I had to, like, take a step back from it because I felt like it was just too close sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, a key difference is if you go back to the first Kingsman that we recently watched, the camera stays in a pretty basic position for the majority of the fight scenes. That's true. So, like, Colin Firth's fight scene in the bar, it really is right here the whole time, and you see him fight, and they do a couple little camera tricks to cut away and cut back, but for the most part, that's where you're focused. And for the action in this movie, it almost, like, focuses in on, like, so instead of showing him take the gun, do something cool, shoot the guy, it'll, like, zoom in on the gun as he turns it, and then zoom out to the guy's head where he gets shot, and then zoom out to him fully. And there's a lot of funky things like that it makes you feel like you can't focus on the scene. And
it's a very similar problem to what we had with American Assassin, if you watch our review for that. I will also say the CGI in this film I was not loving. There's quite a few robotic kind of aspects to this movie. The villain does use robots in certain ways for her plan. And there's some close-up shots of certain pieces of these robots where they're like moving their gears and stuff. And it looked really cheesy in my opinion.
So despite our other small issues or bigger issues, our main issue with this film is, in particular, there is a scene about halfway through the movie that's about 20 to 30 minutes long. It's a good chunk of the movie.
I would say it's about 20.
20 probably. And without getting into spoilers, it was gross.
It's very crass. So if you've seen the first film, there is a very crude joke towards the very end of it, which a lot of people did find funny. For me, it didn't land quite right, and I really didn't like it for a lot of different reasons besides it just being like a
crude
joke. There's other things around it that I didn't like, but basically they took that kind of joke and that kind of subject matter-ish and just ran with it and made it like a 20-minute very predatory, derogatory concept towards women, and one woman in particular. And I didn't know you had an issue with it I was very excited to talk to you about after that, because I very much tensed up during that scene. And because of it being so early on in the movie, the first movie, that scene when that happens is towards the end with that joke, and so it didn't quite taint the rest of the movie for me because it was towards the end. But this one was so early in this film that I had a very, very hard time enjoying the rest of the film because of it, and because of a few other factors as well, but that was the one that kind of set my mind thinking about some things.
And ultimately, we talked about it afterwards. If you completely removed this scene, number one, this movie is already 2.5 hours long almost. It's like 2 hours and 20 minutes. And if they had cut out this 20-minute scene that was so unnecessary and egregious and gross, that it wouldn't have hurt the film at all. And in fact, I think it hurt the characters, like particularly the lead character, Eggsy, because it's such a gross, like Brittany said, predatory moment that it very much taints his character. And for me, the rest of the film, where you go, why would he just go along with that? Why was that okay? And it was hard to then sit through the next hour and a half and still really enjoy this movie after that happened. And it's not like they stopped. That type of lowbrow humor continues through the rest of the movie.
So before we get into a little bit more of our spoiler talk, overall, this movie was pretty disappointing, I think, to both of us. While there were some really enjoyable aspects of it, I think the execution of the storyline and the concept overall was really poor and really missed the mark in a lot of situations, which is really disappointing because I really wanted to like this movie. I really like the world. I like the characters. I want to see more of it, or I did before this movie. I don't think I'll see a third one after this one. Honestly, I don't think I'll give it money. But I really was rooting for it. I really wanted to like it. I didn't go into this wanting to dislike it, so I was bummed.
Yeah, it felt like they just took a really good idea, but ran the complete wrong direction with it. And I've seen a couple other reviews say kind of what I kind of feel about it, where they said it felt like a movie studio took the success of the first movie and was like, what did they like? It must have been all the crude jokes and the action, and that's it, and completely forgot to focus on the characters and the story, because like I said, the first one had so much heart in it, and that's what really drew me into that series. The action was a bonus, and it just seemed like their focus was in the wrong place for this one.
Alright, so that's going to conclude our non-spoiler section of this. If you have not seen this movie yet and do not want to be spoiled, please leave now. We'll give you a couple seconds, but we're about to get into more spoiler talk, and this is going to be a lot of our negative feelings about this movie. While we did have some positive ones, this spoiler section is going to be mostly focused on expanding on the really negative aspects of it, so keep that in mind as you're watching.
Yeah, so like we said before, there was that one scene in the middle, but let's just talk in general. The female characters in this movie are awful.
It's atrocious, and honestly, for probably the first 15, 20, 30 minutes of the film, I wasn't really focusing on that. It didn't seem like something that stood out to me. It seemed alright until we had that scene about a third, halfway through the film that we had such huge issues with, which is the scene where Eggsy and Whiskey are both going after this girl to place a tracker on her to find the golden circle because she's part of it. And the only way to put a tracker on her is to get it through her mucous membrane, which for those of you any familiar with biology knows that you have to do it through like mouth, nose, or genitalia. And they decided that the only way to do it is through genitalia. So they essentially start to compete for this woman and hitting on her and seducing her so that they can put a finger up her vagina and put a tracker on her. And it is just one of the most disgusting things I've seen in a film in a long time. I was very, very upset.
Yeah, they spent a good chunk of time having both these guys basically, predator on this woman, trying to figure out how they can finger her, and try to manipulate her into that. And then right afterwards, bail out. And it was gross. Not to mention the fact that the way they decided to show this is they literally showed his finger with the tracker on it go down into her underwear, and then it did a weird zoom in shot into her underwear, into her vagina, and you get to watch the tracker go into her vagina, and it's like, this is my face the whole time. I was just like,
so during this scene is when I started to pay attention to how the female characters were written in this movie. And they're not done well at all. None of them. I don't think there's a single female in this movie that isn't there for the advancement of the male characters. And I haven't seen this egregious of an example of this in movies that I've seen recently in a while. And I don't think the first movie really did this. It is a very male-dominated film. I expect that out of a spy movie, unfortunately. I would love to have a more female-led one, but that's another story. But it felt like more of a boys' club thing, but not in a huge, toxic, harmful way. And this movie very much felt like a very toxic masculinity, harmful boys' club. Like, it was much more than a boys' club. It was bad. Yeah,
so, in particular, the main female character from the first film, they decide to kill off in the first 10 minutes.
The other agent, Roxy.
Yeah, they kill Roxy in the first 10 minutes.
But not before they, make a weird connection between her and Eggsy. We knew they got close in training in the first film, but I never felt like they were, that
but
close.
Then he's like, we're best friends.
But they have this interaction where they're like, oh, well, are you thankful for me as, an agent? Am I the best agent or the best friend? And he's like, best friend. So you get this connection, then, 5 minutes later, she's dead. So she was only in the movie for this small piece to form that very quick connection with Eggsy and then to die so he can have an emotional turmoil moment. And the situation with Roxy is not the only case in this movie where a female character dies just for the emotional trauma of a male character to push forward his narrative. Whiskey's wife is the same situation, or his girlfriend, whatever she was, high school sweetheart. The only reason she's brought up in the film is because, Whiskey has the head trauma injury and they have to jar him back with an emotional memory. So they have to have his wife, girlfriend, whatever, be killed by drug addicts robbing a liquor store or a convenience store, whatever. The only reason she's mentioned is to further his agenda of being a turmoil emotional man. And I just have issues with it. And
yeah, even Eggsy's girlfriend, who I at first thought they were going to redeem after the crude anal sex joke at the end of the last one. They actually made them together, and I thought, okay, cool, then she's not just a sex object from the first one, they're actually together. He clearly cares for her, and then the movie, after 1 or 2 pretty solid scenes with her, decides that, oh, in fact, she will just become a sex object, because then she goes, oh, well, if you save the world again, you know what we get to do. And this movie does about 3 full scene callbacks to that first anal sex joke from the first one. And it's not
so
funny.
Unnecessary.
It was just crude and lowbrow humor. It was honestly every time you're like, again?
Not only that, but during the scene that we mentioned earlier with the predatory getting the tracker on the girl part, Eggsy calls his girlfriend to be like, hey babe, I gotta sleep with somebody as part of the mission. Hope you're okay with that. And you think it's kind of nice at first. I thought he was being nice at first. I'm like, it's really cool of him to warn her or check in with her. But then when she says, I'm not okay with this, he's like, what do you mean you're not okay with this? I have to do this to save the world, blah, blah, blah. It's very manipulative.
It was very odd, because I said this to her. It was a moment to show that Eggsy was beyond that the good guy that we all want to root for was actually better than to just, predator on their, respect his relationship. Because he even goes, if you're not okay with it, I won't do it. And she goes, I'm not okay with it.
And then he's like, what do you mean you're not okay with it?
And he's like, what, I have to. And she's like, okay, fine then, peace. And hangs up on him. But it's that was a moment where he could have walked out and just put his finger in her nose and walked away and it would have been fine. Or play coy and she could have like licked his finger or something, you know? Right. And then like could have been like, "Oh, see you later." And
or I mean, if you want to play into the violence of the movie, you could have accidentally cut her arm open and then touched her wound with your little finger condom thing. Like,
and especially
there are an infinite amount of ways to do this.
And especially they revealed that she actually has a circle on her back, so she's part of the golden circle. And I thought at that point he was gonna walk up, punch her in the face, and stick it in her mouth or something, you know, like. But he doesn't do that, and then that's like what gets him to decide to sleep. It was just
very odd,
and that it was so unnecessary.
You also have Poppy, the villain of this movie, which I actually really liked Julianne's Moore performance, like I mentioned earlier in the video. But her character is still referenced derogatorily, like throughout the film, and while heroes hate their villains, like they say bad things about them all the time, I feel like there's not a really good equivalent to calling a girl a bitch as there is for like calling a guy something similar. And even if there is, they didn't do that with any of the male villains with the first one or the second one. And this one, they refer to Julianne Moore's character as a bitch several times, and usually that word doesn't bother me super badly, but in this it did because of the way it was used and the frequency of it.
Well, you can tell when it's like a natural thing, when someone's like, "Oh, what a bitch," you know. But the fact that anytime she's mentioned, no one even just uses a simple pronoun like, "Oh, she's the worst," or "she's going to do that." It goes out of its way to say, "That bitch is going to do that thing. That bitch hung up on me. That
It's said with a lot of spite."
Yeah, over and over again, you're like, we get it.
Every single female character is pushed to the background or killed off for the advancement of the male characters, and I just really had a big issue with it. And honestly, I'm at the point in my life where something like that in a film genuinely makes me not enjoy it. And if you're someone who that doesn't bother, great. I really hope that you enjoyed this movie, but I just didn't.
My final big problem with this movie is they have a cameo. And it's not even a cameo. He is a full-fledged... He gets more screen time than some of the main characters. He gets more screen time than Channing Tatum in the marketing.
Yeah, he does.
They have Elton John in this movie, and at first it's a funny thing because she took Elton John captive. It's hilarious. It's funny. But
it keeps going. It doesn't end.
He's in so many scenes. The final showdown, he's there on screen as much as Eggsy or Colin Firth.
Doing martial arts moves.
And yeah, and there's this weird thing where every once in a while he just says "fuck" a lot, and then like we'll look towards the camera and smile like it's this funny in joke.
Cursing's so funny, guys.
And the scene that killed it for me was then, yeah, he jumps in the air and does a huge ninja kick into this dude's face. And right before he does it, it goes slow-mo and he turns the camera and just goes...
like midair.
And then kicks him in the face and jumps, spins, and kicks the other guy in the face. And I'm like, the fuck was that? Because it was so out of nowhere and weird. And I just didn't get it. And then he continues.
Yeah, he has quite a bit of screen time. And not only that, but he also gets I think it's the second or third reference to the anal sex joke from the first one, where, is it the third one? I can't remember. There's too many.
Yeah.
Where he's talking to, I believe it's Colin Firth's character, Harry, and Harry's like, "Hey, I really hope that after this I would be able to get some tickets to one of your shows or whatever." And he's like, "Honey, you can get a backstage pass." And I'm like...
If you save the world.
If you save the world, which I'm like... It's very clearly a backdoor joke. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Ha ha, Elton John's gay, so he'll up.
So funny.
Why is he here so much?
Apparently, I heard from someone else's review that it's a comic book reference. Don't quote me on that because I haven't done my research on it.
Here's my
thing.
If it is. Yeah, I don't care. The way they used him was egregious. He should have been nothing more than a cameo, and that would have been funny and enjoyable. But it was so egregious and nonsensical, it honestly killed the third act for me, because every time he popped up in every scene of the third act, it was stupid.
It just brings you out of the action.
Yeah, it
takes you out of the movie, which you don't want to have happen when you're immersed in something.
I can't say it. That was probably one of my least favorite parts of the movie. I was like, after all the gross stuff of how they treat females the whole movie, I was trying to like still get some enjoyment out of this final action scene. And freaking Elton John kept popping up and ruining it with the nonsensical, the weird fourth wall breaking, looking at the camera. It was rough. So those were all our big spoilery problems with the movie, and they just killed our enjoyment of all the stuff, because at its core, this movie is still deeply flawed in a lot of areas, but with those extra details, it's just become such a hard movie to enjoy, even just as a fun action movie. So we are disappointed.
But, you know, this is just our opinion, and we all have our own opinions. Those are allowed here, despite what some people on the internet tried to tell you. So let us know what your opinion of this movie was. Do you agree with us in some areas, all areas, or do you totally disagree with us? Let us know down in the comments. We would love to chat with you about it. And if you like our movie reviews and liked this video, please give us a thumbs up. It lets us know that you enjoy these things. And we do a lot of different videos on this channel, so if you want to stay tuned for those, please subscribe. We would love to have you join our BSReview family. And we will have some of those videos linked right over here for you. And we will see you next time. Bye, guys.